Is Batman Caped Crusader any good? Let's find out. Hello everyone, I'm K-Swope, and when Batman Caped Crusader was first announced, people were really excited. There was a lot of hype behind it because some of the people who were announced to be on the creative side of the show were J.J. Abrams, Matt Reeves, who of course did the Batman, and then of course Bruce Timm, who did Batman the Animated Series. But did this hype pay off? Well, stick around to the end of the video because we will discuss. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. This is the first season, if you will, of television I reviewed on this channel. So, as a result, still working out my format a little bit, but here's what my plan is going to be. I'm going to go through every episode, and I'm going to talk about the good and the bad, and there's a few things I'm kind of mixed on that I'll throw in there too, depending on the episode. And I gave each episode individually a rating between 1 and 10. Keep that in mind as we go in. At the end, what I'm going to do is take all of my episode scores. I'm going to find the average number, and then we will round either up or down depending on what that number is to find what I give this season of television in general. So, it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's dive right in with. Also, important thing to mention, there are spoilers in this review, because like I said, I'm going to go through all of the episodes. I'm not holding back spoilers. If I think they need to be talked about, I definitely will. Episode 1, In Treacherous Waters. So, the first thing I noticed about this show that I want to talk about is the guy who voices Batman, okay? I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, but I think it's, I'm going to read my script here. Hamish Linklater, I think. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I apologize. But I think, does a fantastic job in this series. I think he does a really good job with showing that distinction between Bruce Wayne and Batman. That is something that's always very important. That's something that I think since Michael Keaton specifically, every Batman actor and voice actor has had to really kind of show that. And the thing that I think is really interesting, too, throughout the whole series is he speaks in the Batman voice at all times unless he's in public, which I don't think we've seen that before. And at first it was a little jarring, but then I realized what he's doing, and I'm like, huh, that kind of makes sense. So I'm kind of on board with that. But either way, throughout the series, he does a fantastic job. And of course, in this episode, right from the bat, I noticed it, which is fantastic. The other thing that's cool, and we'll dive into this part a little later because I do have a lot of thoughts on it, but the main villain of this episode is the Penguin. And one change that they made to the Iceberg Lounge inside this episode, which I like a lot, very different from the Batman source material, is they made the Iceberg Lounge a boat, like a club on the water, which I think is kind of a cool idea. It makes a lot of sense, being the Iceberg Lounge floating out, off the shores of Gotham. So I think that's a really cool little thing. It's more of a small detail here and there than it is having to do with the episode, but I think it's nice to mention anyways. The other thing about this episode that's great is that Batman actually fails, which is something that we don't see that often, especially in superhero media. He fails to keep Penguin from destroying the police department. Now, I don't think anyone was harmed, which is good, but he still failed, and that's because this series takes place with a younger Batman. And so I really like younger Batman stories where there are stakes, like he can fail, like he's not as good as we know him to be yet. He's still got to work his way to get there. So that was a nice treat. I liked seeing that. So those were the good things of episode 1. Unfortunately, I have a lot more bad things to say than good things. So diving right into this. The biggest problem with this episode is that the events that took place, they don't matter in the series. So let me tell you what I mean by that. There's a lot that they kind of set up. There's a lot that they do with the characters. But in the end, the police station blows up. But in the next episode, they're all fine. They don't even make reference to it, I don't think, if I'm not mistaken. And that's just, I don't know. It's not that it's bad writing. It's just that I don't like it. Because they make a lot of changes, and this goes into my next point too. The Penguin is a woman for some reason, and why? Who looked at the Penguin? That's my question. Who looked at the Penguin and said, hey, you know what would make this character better? It should be a woman. That's not why anyone likes the Penguin. So why are they changing that? And now it's just kind of weird because, quite frankly, they didn't change a whole lot about the character other than making her a woman and having, I guess, were they actually her sons? I'm not entirely sure. One of them, she drowns, being this mob boss and stuff, and I don't know. It really put me off. I'll put it like that. It's kind of ugly to think about, if that makes sense. So another thing about this series that, of course, I noticed specifically in this episode because it started, is for some reason they also made Alfred fat, which I know it's a nitpick, I know, but it just seems out of character for me when I think of Alfred because he was in some type of I don't remember his full background, but he served in the British military. He's got a lot of training and things like that. He helped Bruce Wayne becoming Batman and all of this stuff. And it just doesn't make sense to me that he would let himself go. But if Alfred helped anyway with his training, his physical training to be specific, then it doesn't make sense to me that they make the character overweight. Because that just, I don't know, something's not adding up. Because if you're going to train somebody, odds are you're not overweight. The decision to make Alfred a little plump is also just kind of weird. So, I mean, if they explain that he didn't help in Bruce Wayne's training at all, then okay, I'll let it pass. But it doesn't seem right. Now, here is something that's going to come up multiple times. But my least favorite, the most insufferable character of this entire series, if you ask me, unfortunately, is Barbara Gordon. Barbara Gordon just seems so smug and kind of know-it-all. She gives a lot of like Brie Larson vibes, and I really, really don't like that. Just cocky, overconfident, stubborn. And it's not that those traits can be bad, but when they're written the way that they wrote her, it's bad. When you take a character who's cocky and overconfident, but you don't give them any reason to be cocky and overconfident, and you never challenge that character flaw, because it is a character flaw to be quite honest, then it's just annoying. And they never do that in the series. So she's just annoying the whole series, and honestly, it drives me nuts. The other thing with Barbara Gordon that I'm not a fan of too, and this is a pattern that's been going on in a lot of Hollywood, but I'm calling it ginger washing, where they're taking characters, a lot of them are comic book characters too, that are gingers or were originally gingers, and for some reason it's only when they're gingers, and then they're making them black for some reason. Now, it's not that I care about, the race stuff here and there, because, for example, I think, take the movie The Batman. I think that Jeffrey Wright did an amazing job as Commissioner Gordon in that movie. I know Commissioner Gordon's not black in the comics, but I don't care because Jeffrey Wright is a great actor and he did justice to that role. Now, bringing it back in, taking characters who are supposed to be gingers and making them black for no reason, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's really strange. There's this tweet from Elon Musk, I'm going to put it up on screen, where he kind of points it out, and I think it's a really good tweet. That's why I'm bringing it up. But it just, I don't know why they keep doing it in Hollywood nowadays, because I'm really tired of seeing it. And I know some people who are gingers who are also really tired of seeing it, because it's funny because for them trying to be more inclusive, they're excluding people. So, food for thought. But those are my general thoughts on the start of the series in the first episode. Overall, I give this episode 6 out of 10, because it was interesting, it was entertaining, but it wasn't great, if you ask me. It could have done a lot better. But anyways, moving on to episode 2, and Be a Villain. It was in this episode that I actually paused and realized that the art and the animation in this show are actually really, really good, which makes sense because I'm assuming Amazon put a lot of money into it because they put a lot of money into their cast. And I just think the art looks very intentional, looks very good. And I really like the Batman, his suit in this, because it is almost identical to the Batsuit that we see in Detective Comics issue 27, where Batman first appeared. Few changes, though. For one, they make the cape a little more modernized for Batman, making it a little more practical, less, bulky, as it looked a lot in that comic issue. They also changed his gloves, so they look the same, but they're just black now. And I think it works, quite honestly. I think that works, as well as the rest of the art looking really nice in the show. And they're really theming it in this 40s kind of look, and I think it looks pretty nice. Plus, the animation style is also very good, very smooth. It does exactly what it needs to do, and I think they did a really good job on that end. So this episode, I really liked the story that they were telling. I really liked what they did with Clayface, because it was a unique spin on it. And funny enough, this episode, I think, shares a lot of plot beats with Phantom of the Opera, which is kind of weird. And I only know this because I just rewatched it recently. And I noticed a lot of... They didn't quite do the Phantom of the Opera, but I kept thinking about that as I was watching it. And I think Clayface is, if you're going to do something similar to it, Clayface is like the perfect villain you can pick for that. And yeah, it was a unique spin on the character. They're definitely in this series not going full on meta-human and Superman level bad guys that Batman's going to end up fighting. So I think that's a unique thing. And you can really see that with how they tone down Clayface. Because Clayface, I don't know if I consider him superpowered in this per se. Because we have some villains that we'll see later on in the series that are superpowered. But he's definitely the first, for lack of a better term, freakish villain I think Batman's probably ever fought. Which is very interesting and unique. Another note in this episode, The main protagonist is really Detective Renee Montoya, and I think this plot how it's set up, I think she makes a really good protagonist in it, honestly. She was unique to see. She didn't have the Barbara Gordon problems where she was like smug and annoying. It's like she was a cop, she took her job seriously, and I respected that, and she just did things by the book. She did things normally. She's not one of those crazy corrupt cops in Gotham, which is nice to see. And she's kind of investigating this whole murder and kidnapping that takes place in the episode. So overall, I mean, the episode wasn't super crazy. It wasn't super exciting, but it wasn't really bad either. I will say, though, we're going to move on to my first mixed opinion, because I don't know how I feel about this, but Lucius Fox in this universe is Bruce Wayne's lawyer and not the CEO of Wayne Enterprises, which is really weird, because now that I'm thinking about it, Wayne Enterprises I don't think has even shown up in the show or was referenced at all. So that's something I'm just now thinking about. It's kind of strange. I don't know how I feel about that. If they make it worthwhile, then hey, maybe I won't care. But as I'm thinking about it right now, I do care a little bit, but I don't really have a strong opinion one way or another at this moment, so that's going to be mixed. I also don't really have anything bad to say about the episode. Like I said, it was pretty good. It was pretty well executed. It wasn't, the most exciting thing ever, maybe, so maybe I can say that was bad. But generally, it's a decent episode, so I give this one a 7.5, 7.5 out of 10. And rolling on up to episode 3, Kiss of a Catwoman. The good things. The opening, before opening credits, I think that was really interesting, because we're kind of setting up Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle. They kind of sort of know each other, and we're setting up a lot of things for the plot. And Bruce Wayne literally punches a guy in the face, and it gets caught on camera. It's a public thing. And I think that is an interesting way to start an episode. So can't complain about that. I quite enjoyed seeing that, because then as soon as that happened, I was hooked. And I'm like, well, what now? The other thing I want to say, too, the B plot of this episode, I really enjoyed, because it's Batman at counseling. And we saw him there. He was actually being counseled by Harley Quinn, which was very interesting. Harley Quinzel. I have a lot to say. She has her whole own episode later on, which, again, I have a lot to say about that episode, so I'll save those opinions for then. But it was really interesting to see, because she was trying to pry at what made him lash out and punch the guy that we saw in the opening. And he is trying to be super careful and very guarded about it and put on this Bruce Wayne face, which she may or may not have been able to see through, which is kind of ambiguous, which it'll make for some interesting conversations down the road. I can definitely tell you that. Another thing I noticed in this episode is I really like how the Batcave is designed, because it is very stripped back, very simple, and I think that's good, because we've seen a lot of complex Batcaves, and it's nice kind of just going back to the basics, where it's very similar to the animated series Batcave, if you sit and think about it, because you can see the stairs like behind a clock or whatever. We don't actually see, but there's like a staircase. It kind of comes down to just a big circle. There's a few tables set up and the Bat computer, and that's kind of it. It's just a big open space, and there's a little trail, I believe, that goes to the Batmobile, which leads through a tunnel. So, like I said, very simple, very nice. It doesn't need to be over the top, and again, it looks really good with the art style that they are going for in this series. Another thing in this episode, so I'm never a big fan of the Catwoman, I guess, what is it, the Gold Age, Silver Age, whatever costume that she kind of wears. That purple one with like the dress thing and the green cape. I honestly think it looks stupid and ridiculous, and that's the style they went for this one. And I kind of thought it was funny then when Catwoman gets shot and it grazes her leg because she's wearing this skirt with a big cut in it, which is very impractical. So I think it's kind of funny that she kind of paid for the impracticality of her costume. Because, if she would have had that covered in any way, shape, or form, it probably would have helped, but I don't know. So that's technically a bad thing, but I think because it kind of pays off and she kind of does get hurt as a result of it. Not that I'm saying it's good that she gets hurt. Don't take me out of context here. But I do think it is very interesting, and I'm kind of glad that they point out the impracticality of some of these costumes. Now, I've got one bad thing to say about this episode, and it is kind of a big one, but I just don't think Catwoman and her A-plot, where most of the episode is taking place, I just don't find that very interesting. It's just kind of boring. Like, they give me no reason to care really about Catwoman. Like, they show her at the beginning, kind of explain her situation. She's stealing jewelry and things like that to sell. And it's just like, why should I really care, though? There aren't really big enough stakes, if you ask me. So the episode to me just comes off as really mundane and boring, other than the Batman Harley Quinn stuff, the Bruce Wayne Harley Quinn stuff. I think that was interesting. That's the saving grace for the episode, but overall the episode is just kind of meh, and that's why I give it a 6 out of 10. Now, rolling on to episode 4, starting with the good. This episode has another great opening where we're seeing the police declare that they're going to put up a task force to take on Batman, which I think is very interesting, especially after the events of last episode. So I think that's very interesting. The other thing in this episode that I think is really unique and good is it's a very police-centered episode, and we really get to see the dynamic with the Gotham PD, which is kind of nice, because unless it's the show, like, if you ever watched Gotham, I like the show Gotham a lot, but I think that's the only show or time we've really seen outside of the comics what the police dynamics look like on a broader scale. And so this episode was interesting because of that, especially because Detectives Flass and Bullock, they are the absolute worst. And that's a good thing because they're actually well written as corrupt cops. There's one thing that they did that I'm kind of mixed on, so I don't want to talk about that yet at the end of the episode. We'll get there in a second. But other than that, I think their corruption and how they're in it for themselves, and then plus seeing how the police politics works in Gotham was really unique, and it kind of brought it... It was a story I haven't seen before, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what I liked about it. Another thing I want to point out, too, as I mentioned, the art in the show is fantastic, and Firefly, he calls himself Firebug, which I have thoughts on, we'll get to in a minute. But, you know, he's an arsonist, fires everywhere, and the way the fire looks is so beautiful. Like, when he's envisioning whole buildings on fire in this one shot, I'm thinking to myself, that is actually beautiful. Hopefully no one thinks I'm an arsonist and think that I'm crazy. I do love fire a lot, though. Now I'm on an FBI watch list, aren't I? But it's really cool to see. I really like seeing it, and it was beautifully done. This episode also establishes some trust between Batman and Commissioner Gordon, which is very good and very important. They're both in a burning building saving kids together, and that's really good because, as I'm sure we're going to see as this show is going to progress past the first season, that Commissioner Gordon and a lot of the police people are going to be, although they're under official orders to arrest Batman and stop him, they're going to start, the good ones anyways, the good cops, they're going to start allowing him to kind of work with them and that kind of thing so they can actually bring some real justice. And so I think this was a good catalyst for seeing that relationship start. So I'm going to say the bad thing first, and then we're going to go to the mixed because I have one of each. But the only bad thing I have is Firefly, okay? In this episode, he keeps making a big deal that his name is Firebug, and they keep calling him Firefly, like the cops and stuff, to kind of tease him. And there's just so many questions in my head. Why? Because here's the thing. What is a firebug? I don't know. Firebugs are not real names for bugs as far as I'm aware of. So why does he insist that he goes by Firebug? And when we call him Firefly, Firefly is a way cooler name than Firebug. I don't know what's gotten into you. Firefly is a way better name, plus it's actually the name of a bug. Again, not the actual name. Firefly, lightning bug, either way, it's still slang, but the point I'm trying to make is Firefly is way cooler and actually a term people use. Firebug is not. So I have no idea why this guy insists he's called Firebug instead of Firefly. The whole thing just seems so stupid to me. And so I got to add some stupid points to that part of the episode because it's idiotic, frankly. My mixed opinion is they kill Firefly, and I always liked Firefly as a villain, just kind of across the board regardless, and so I didn't like seeing him die. I guess they're probably just not going to use him anymore unless they bring in, you know, like Firefly 2, you know, the female Firefly or anything like that. So there's potential for that. But I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. It doesn't really change my opinion of the episode either way, but I think it's kind of a shame because I like Firefly as a villain, and so I didn't like that they killed him, but it also made for a really good moment in the episode. So don't really know what to think of that. But this episode, overall, I'm going to give it a good 7 out of 10 because it was pretty good. I'm not going to lie. It was pretty good. I quite enjoyed parts of it. Moving on to episode 5, this is where I'm about to get quite brutal. This is definitely the worst episode that we've seen so far. There's one good thing I have to say about it, which is they take Harley Quinn's crazy to a place we've never seen it, which is very interesting for the character. They're trying to do a lot of new takes on the characters. I think some work, some not as much. We'll get more into Harley Quinn in just a minute because she's big on the not as much, if you ask me. But I do think her craziness is very different in a way that we haven't seen. And it's kind of interesting to see it played out the way it is. But I do have some gripes with it as well. There are still some interesting themes with Harley Quinn's craziness. Such as she's taking people who she doesn't think are making progress and almost like torturing them for some reason. Which is going to lead us into bad things. Because I don't know why she's doing that. They never explained in the episode, like, what good is it for her to dress up as a clown and torture some people in her secret office basement? That just doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm thinking to myself, why is she doing this? Because Harley Quinn, as I'm sure you know, her origin story involves her relationship with the Joker, right? The Joker has not been in this series yet. So, what the heck? Why is she the way that she is? And they don't explain any of it. They just kind of roll with it. No one asks these questions. They just kind of assume, oh, okay, she's a bad guy. We should stop her and all this stuff. And it's just like, that's not what makes the character interesting to begin with. Harley Quinn is an interesting character because we know who she is. We know what she's done. Her relationship with the Joker being, they're in love. And then she kind of rebels and goes off. That's what we like to see. And we know that, so we know what kind of character she is. And this, we don't really know what kind of character she is. She just kind of does things, and it's not explained. So, for this episode, because they put so much emphasis on Harley Quinn being the bad guy, you need her to have a motive to do what she's doing, and she has no motive. She's just being evil for some reason. And that's just bad writing, if you ask me. The other thing with Harley Quinn. So, this really puzzles me, and again, I think this is also just really bad writing. This is a really bad episode, if you ask me. But I know in the comics they establish that Renee Montoya is a lesbian and Harley Quinn is like bisexual or pansexual or whatever it is. I don't remember exactly. Because she like dates Poison Ivy or whatever. But it's completely puzzling to me that those two get together to begin with. Because they have like no chemistry. And I just think it's just, again, it's just written really badly. They put it in there just because I guess they wanted that inclusion or representation, the LGBTQ stuff, but like, it's at the detriment of the good episode, because this episode, like I said, is terrible. Straight up. I was cringing throughout the whole episode, and like, I don't know, I just kept thinking bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and it was just, oh man, I don't even know where to begin, honestly, with how bad some of this episode was written. I'm trying to. I gave you a few points already, but it was just, I don't know. Again, some real cringe moments. Speaking of real cringe moments, that makes it bad. So much Barbara Gordon in this episode. And there was so little Batman in this episode as well. And Batman, I mean, it's a Batman series, so I want to see more Batman, and they didn't give it to me. Batman always, in every episode, at least shows up by the end to do something. But a lot of these episodes, he's just kind of, like, he's there, but he's not doing much, which I have more thoughts on that later, so we'll get into that later. It was at this point in the series where I realized how much of this show really isn't Batman, meaning it's a Batman series, but I feel like in a lot of these episodes, Batman doesn't get all that much screen time. So that kind of defeats the purpose for me, because I want to see Batman in my Batman show. And I understand if there are certain episodes here or there where you want to focus on another character or another story arc. I think of, for example, one of my favorite episodes of one of my favorite cartoons, The Batman. There was an episode where Batman is trapped by Black Mask, and Black Mask is being held in the jail in the police department. And it ends up becoming like a lock-in scenario where Black Mask is sending all of his guys in to go rescue him, whereas Batgirl and Robin then have to go about defending and keeping him in jail while also trying to find where Batman is. And so they take him out of the action for a lot of that episode to show more character development with Batgirl and Robin. And that worked out quite well. But also, it's a Batman series, and it focused on Batman for a majority of the episodes, right? As you would expect from a show named after a character. It would be like if the show Dexter took a whole season to focus just on his sister, Deborah. And Dexter just kind of had an episode or two where he was the focus. But, like, the show would be called Dexter, but it needs to be about Dexter. Get what I'm saying? And so this is a series titled Batman, Caped Crusader, yet it doesn't have much Batman in it. So there is an episode, I will say, coming up. It does have a lot of Batman in, and does a lot of things quite well, which I think is the opposite of this episode, and I'll explain all of that later on when we get to it. But for now, this episode, honestly, I think it's trash. I give it a 3 out of 10 overall because it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's nowhere near the best thing, and it's not good. Our next episode, episode 6, diving into things. Here's the good. Batman actually fights his first superpowered villain, which is pretty nice. It's a Gentleman Ghost. And Gentleman Ghost, I've never really read anything with Gentleman Ghost in it, but he was in the Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon series, and I did like him in that. Can't say the same thing about him in this series, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to stay in the good things. The other good thing I have about this episode is at the end, there was a really touching moment between Batman and Alfred, because Alfred nearly died, and so they have a really good moment there. They have a good, quick conversation. I thought that was nice because we haven't seen a whole lot of that between the relationship between Alfred and Batman yet. So the bad things about this episode, first thing is it's kind of boring. I found myself when I was watching it just kind of bored. There was just not a whole lot that excited me in it. Gentleman Ghost, I don't even think he's a Batman villain technically. I don't know who he normally fights, but not that that's an issue because they can take villains from other superheroes and stuff and make them fight Batman, but I think if they're going to do that, they should at least give them an exciting, interesting reason to, and I just didn't feel any good reason for this. So yeah, he was kind of boring. The plot was kind of slow and boring. Another issue I have is that Alfred seemed to be wearing plot armor in the whole episode because at the end they kind of put him in danger, but I'm like, guys, this is Alfred. Nothing bad's going to happen to him. They're going to win in the end. And sure enough, they did. And I just never felt like there was any real sense of danger for the character. Another gripe I have, and this isn't just with this episode per se, it's more of this episode just did a trope that I'm kind of sick of seeing. When they're fighting supernatural bad guys, then they always turn to some type of magic or voodoo or whatever to stop them. It's like you're fighting evil with evil, and that just seems kind of dumb to me. It's like, if you really want to solve these kind of problems, turn to Jesus, okay? The most powerful name, the name above all names. Any of your supernatural issues you're dealing with, okay? Jesus can fix it, and I don't know why in Hollywood, generally speaking, they don't give that enough credit. I've never seen any of the Exorcist movies, but from what I've heard, Exorcist Believer tries to make it sound like all of these other forms of spiritualism are just as impactful as Christianity. No, because all other forms of spirituality is just some form of Satanism. So, I don't know. It just seems dumb to me. Never a fan of that story arc, but this episode, again, it's boring. Not a whole lot to say about it other than it's boring, and I have that gripe. So overall, I give it a 4 out of 10. So moving things right along into episode 7. Now, the good things. There are 2 things in this episode that I like specifically. One is that Deadshot gets a cameo because the assassin in the opening, they identify in the next scene after the opening credits as Floyd Lawton, which is Deadshot. So that was kind of fun to see. So there was that. And then there was a plot twist at the end of the episode where the assassins were not trying to kill Gordon, they were trying to kill Barbara, which is very interesting because even I didn't see that coming. And if I would have seen it coming, I probably would have said something about it. But then as I'm watching the episode, I hear it and I'm like, oh, I actually did not think about that. So that was good because when a plot twist like that can catch me off guard, that's a good thing. But also I didn't know it was coming, so that helps a lot too, that I wasn't expecting a plot twist to happen this episode. I guess I'd say it's good writing. It was good writing there. Now, bad things I want to say. Barbara Gordon, she makes some claim at the beginning of the episode, which is just completely stupid because she's doing criminal defense attorney stuff, if I haven't said that already before. She's doing criminal defense attorney stuff. She's a public defender. She gets asked by her dad why she's letting these people go and helping them off the hook and things like that. And she says that people should not be essentially judged by their actions. And I'm thinking to myself, what? Because my personal philosophy is, regardless of however you think of yourself or people think of you, you are a result of the actions you take. Therefore, if I go out there and I help the poor for no personal benefit, no personal reason, and if I do that kind of thing, people are going to look at me and say, hey, that was a nice, generous guy, okay? Because of my actions, okay? It doesn't matter what philosophies I have. It doesn't matter what my opinions are on things. The fact that I did something, and now I am something because I did something, right? And to make things even more funny, Batman even agrees with me. Because if we take it back to Batman Begins, Batman says, and I quote, "It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me." So, I think that's stupid. I don't know why they even put that question out there. As I mentioned earlier, too, Deadshot, he does make a cameo. However, I liked seeing him in the name drop. That was pleasant. But what wasn't pleasant is that he dies, and they're just throwing away a good Batman villain in a cameo, which I think is completely stupid. It's different if he made a cameo and then just kind of left, because I was like, oh, okay, maybe he'll come back later. But for one, it's kind of disrespectful because he fails an assassination attempt. And this is Deadshot we're talking about, who's like the greatest marksman ever, failing an assassination attempt with a gun. Then they kill him off. And I'm like, wow, way to add insult to injury, I guess. It's episode 2. Another thing I want to say, it is also kind of slow and boring. And I think part of that is due to the fact that there is not a whole lot of Batman in it once again. It picks up a little bit at the end. Like I said, there's that plot twist. So because there was that good thing, it kind of offsets things a little bit. So I'm not going to beat on this episode too hard. Because like I said, there is some good with some bad. So I'm very mixed on it. So overall, I give this episode a 6.5 out of 10. Now, ladies and gentlemen, episode 8, okay? This episode, if you ask me, is the greatest episode of this show so far. Let me tell you why. I have a lot of good. I've had maybe one criticism, but it's more of a nitpick than it is a full criticism. But, first of all, this episode, it does exactly what I was complaining with the last few episodes doing. It does the opposite of that, okay? That being, they make the episode about Batman and Bruce Wayne. What happens is, there's this carnival and stuff going on, and these orphans are going missing. And it's really good because, as I'm sure you know, Bruce Wayne is also an orphan. He cares about the orphans quite a lot. When he's still in character as Bruce Wayne, not Batman, he's going and helping try to find these orphans, which I think is great, and it shows a lot about Batman's character. It's a noble thing, and we see more nobility coming from Batman as this episode progresses, which we will get onto in just a minute. But as I mentioned before, too, the gentleman that voices Batman in this is fantastic in this episode, really showing off those skills. Another fun thing, too, I mentioned cameos in the last episode. Well, this episode, all of the orphans that they're trying to find are actually based off of different Robins that Batman has had. There's a kid that they call Dickie, who's Dick Grayson. A kid named Jason, who goes by Jace. There is Stephanie Brown. And then there's Carrie Kelly. So 4 Robins for you right there. I think it is quite funny how they did that, because they didn't disrespect the characters. I don't know if they're going to do Robin in this series or not, but they at least kind of gave that nudge. So I don't know what they're going to do, if they even bring on a Robin, or maybe Robins, I was thinking of when I was watching the episode, which is a potential thing. It'd be cool if they did something with that. That'd be a little unique. But either way, it was a touching tribute to the character of Robin, especially given that he's had so many characters, so many different identities. Not to mention, the voice actors that they got to play all of the Robins, they honestly sounded adorable. Another thing that's cool, too, is Killer Croc also makes a nice and respectable cameo, unlike Deadshot did in the last episode. In this episode, he's one of the circus freaks, which is kind of fun, because that's something I would totally see Killer Croc in a circus, given that he's just some kind of mutant weirdo, I guess. There's a guy, I saw him, then they refer to him as Waylon, and Waylon Jones, that's Killer Croc. And so I saw that. He tussles with tussles with Bruce Wayne a little bit. And I think that was nice because they left the door open for him to come back, maybe. And Killer Croc, I mean, no one hates Killer Croc. He's a pretty solid character, a pretty good villain. Something else that's really good in this episode, too. The villain is another kid. The kid's basically going to die, and Batman saves her, even though she's bad. I think is very true to Batman, very true to the character. Because Batman, even though he's really hard and dark and tough on criminals, that's why he takes in people like Robins, right? Because he sees people going down a certain path, and he really has a heart for the kids, and he wants to help them so that they don't fall down and make the same mistakes that some of these villains do, and some of the same mistakes that he did and he made even as well. So you really get to see that throughout this episode, not just with how passionate he is for trying to help the orphans, but also, given the villain is also a kid who's just made some bad choices and things like that, how he helps her and eventually saves her and gets her to safety. So I think that was a really good thing. Very touching, too, it hit me in the feels, I'll say that. It hit me in the feels, and I'm like, this is Batman. This is the Batman that I know and love. Another brief thing I want to mention, too, his date in this episode is Julie Madison, which I think is nice because it's a pretty deep comic cut, because Julie Madison, if I'm not mistaken, is the first girlfriend that Bruce Wayne has in the comics. So seeing her show up in this, I think is also pretty fantastic, because she has such early ties to Batman, especially given that the show takes place in what looks like the 40s as well. So having such a classic love interest be in this episode is also really nice. We have, however, seen Julie Madison in none other than the cinematic masterpiece, Batman and Robin. Don't kill me, I'm being sarcastic. She appeared in that as George Clooney Batman's love interest for that movie as well. So this would be, I want to say it's her only second appearance in Batman media outside of comics. And I do want to say, if it's not obvious already, this is easily the best episode of this whole season, if you ask me. We still have 2 episodes left, and I don't think either of those 2 episodes top this one. We'll dive into those later. I will say the next episode, though, is also pretty good, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The one bad thing, again, it is more of a nitpick, but the bad guy, right, the girl who's almost killing people, they don't really explain her powers that well. That's my biggest complaint, because she kind of like sucks like life energy out of people. She can kill people because she kills like one guy, her brother or whatever. She can do that, and then it makes her like more powerful and strong, but we don't know what that all looks like. We see earlier in the episode that they do this, magic trick kind of thing where it looks like they're making her stronger and she lifts this heavy weight. So we know that she's got that strength. We also know, she's kind of fast, not like super fast or anything. And she seemed to be attacking like with her fingernails. So I don't know if that has something to do with her powers. And then the reason she's dying at the end is because she's being exposed to like sunlight. I'm thinking to myself, like, are you a vampire who doesn't suck blood? It was kind of confusing, but I don't think that's important really for the episode. So again, it's more of a nitpick than anything. Another great point of this episode too is throughout the episode we're seeing Harvey Dent. Now Harvey Dent has been in the whole series, but he hasn't really been that important to the plot. In this episode, though, and last episode, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he makes a deal with the crime boss guy saying, hey, I'll do stuff for you for campaign money. So he's doing that. And in this episode, the whole reason this carnival is happening is because he wants donations. So he's doing this like a fundraiser thing for the orphanage and things like that, too. He's bringing the orphan kids out, and that's how they get into all this craziness. But Harvey Dent, he's doing it, and as the mob guys are giving him money, they're like, hey, we're going to give you this money. Just make sure that you don't prosecute this one guy. And so Harvey, he kind of struggles with that because on one hand, he thinks that crime in Gotham is bad, and so he needs to be able to be the mayor to do that. But in order to become the mayor, he has to dive into some level of corruption. So in the end, he decides to do the right thing and prosecute the bad guy. And as a result, the mob guy sends his like number one dude in, and he does the whole classic Two-Face acid in the face thing. And so the episode ends, but it felt earned. And what I mean by that is through the episode, they're showing you the progression. And I think that's really good because I can show you this episode out of context. And as long as you're kind of familiar with Batman and the character of Two-Face, I think you don't really need to see what happened before, so it can stand alone. And I think that is a good storytelling method. Diving on into episode 9. The good things about this episode. For one, this follows directly the events of the last episode, which is where he becomes Two-Face. And Dietrich Bader, Rex Kwon Do, he pops off in this episode. His voice acting for Harvey Dent / Two-Face is really, really good. You can definitely tell certain lines he says are coming from the Two-Face side where he's super nasty and things like that. And other times he's very, like Harvey Dent where he just wants to do what's right. And so they play the Two-Face character very interesting in how they wrote him in this show. A unique spin they put on the character that I quite like is the fact that his villain arc, he becomes very unstable because of, first of all, what happened to his face, but also it's his own insecurities of what people are going to think about him and saying about him that cause him to act the way he does and basically just do bad guy stuff. Which is a unique spin because normally it's more psychological, I think, in other Batman stuff where he's just like two completely different people. Whereas in this, it's like, it feels more realistic. And that I appreciate because he's one guy who, on one hand, is super insecure and kind of like angry and violent. And then the other side, he's actually, more healthy. And those two sides of his mind are kind of debating throughout kind of the whole episode, which is pretty unique to see. They also do a good job in this episode establishing him not as a terrible character, but as we see those more negative traits start to manifest, we see him start to spiral downwards to the point where he's literally trying to kill people. So that's a very, again, unique spin, unique twist, which I think, again, just it's pretty good storytelling. That's all I can say. It's written well. This episode, I do have a nitpick and a bad thing. The nitpick just kind of being the pace was a little off at times. It was started off definitely a little slower than some other ones did. And I think it also really slowed down at the end a lot. But again, that's not super big. That is a nitpick. But the one thing I don't like is Batman really flips out at Alfred in this episode, and it feels like he's doing it for no reason. He's just kind of like angsty and mad, and I don't quite get why. And it just seems really out of character, especially because it never gets resolved. It'd be different if he was going through something in the episode and he flips out at Alfred for whatever reason, and then at the end, after he finishes his problem, he goes back to Alfred and says, "Hey Alfred, sorry for flipping out on you," and talks about how important his relationship with Alfred is, because it is very important. But this episode, again, pretty good episode. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the finale, episode 10, and it's a doozy. First things first, the good things. I think the character building that they do at the end of the episode is pretty good, pretty well written. You can definitely see that they're finally kind of starting to get a groove for this whole Batman shtick and how this is all going to play out and work. Also, at the very end of this episode, they tease, I guess for season 2, we're finally going to get to see the Joker, which is great because that's something I was thinking about through the whole series. In my opinion, it's an injustice to try to do Batman without bringing the Joker in somewhere. Because if you ask me, if you ever see the series Beware the Batman, they left Joker completely out of it, and it was really missing something as a result, I think. So, knowing that Joker is going to be in the next season makes me a little excited for it. I can't say I'm like super excited for it, but definitely the teaser helped me be at least a little excited. Now, this episode has a lot more problems than it does good things. For one, again, pacing, it just feels really slow. Not a whole lot exciting happens until closer to the end. Something else about the episode, Barbara Gordon is in it a lot, and as I said, I pretty much eye roll every time I see her, because I don't like, let me clarify something quick. I like Barbara Gordon and Batgirl in almost everything, okay? But not here. They just, again, they make her insufferable in this. But she's in this episode a lot. She is the lawyer for Harvey Dent, who himself, being a DA and a lawyer, kind of weird. She's also a hardcore Mary Sue in this episode, specifically because there's this whole thing where there's a shootout. They're trying to kill Harvey Dent, the bad guys, the mob guys, so that he can't testify against them in court. This whole shootout's happening. They're in like a docks area. There's some wooden crates and stuff. And Barbara Gordon's got a gun. Her and Harvey Dent, Two-Face, they're kind of running. They go around a corner. Some guys are shooting at them with a machine gun. They're hiding behind the corner of a crate, okay? Crates are made out of wood, okay? Bullets go through wood. Now, they're hiding behind there, and Two-Face, Harvey Dent, he's there and he's ducking, okay? Because he understands that he's being shot at, right? Barbara Gordon then just takes her pistol around the corner and goes like, pew, 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 not scared of anything, and I think she hits the guys, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm thinking to myself, like, that's so illogical, that's so stupid. And again, just the character is just very unlikable, very Mary Sue. Like, nothing bad really happens to her. So, I don't know. Again, they can fix this in the next season, hopefully. But, again, characters like that, if they do not eat humble pie, I will just keep hating them. And Barbara Gordon in this series needs some humble pie. I'm telling you that much. Speaking of how bad Barbara Gordon is in this series, of course, I am very unhappy when Two-Face jumps in front of a bullet to save her, because Two-Face was a way more interesting character. Plus, as I mentioned before, Dietrich Bader, he was amazing in that role. And now that he's dead, we're probably not going to see him in the next season, which makes me unhappy, because I think they did his whole episode and his arc in the episode before that very well. So, not happy with how that turned out, especially that he saved a character that I can't stand. I would much rather, no offense, much rather have Barbara Gordon die in this series than Two-Face, because Two-Face was at least interesting. But this is my final note of this episode, and actually my final note of the entire season so far. I think that this show, it's got a lot of potential. It did a few things right, but it also did quite a few things wrong. And so I think going into the next season, it'd be good if they can learn from their mistakes, learn how to maybe pick up some pacing, how to make Batman more of a central character, because I feel like they really missed out there and kind of missed the mark on that. But they did have at least one episode where they did all that very, very well. And so I think if they can learn specifically from that episode and what made it so good, that they can make the series going forward also very, very fantastic. Because, like I said, a lot of good stuff there. The animation and the art are fantastic. Everything like that. But, moral of the story, I think this series really needs to work on trying to find its identity. Overall, I give this finale a doozy of a 2 out of 10 because it did not live up to a big, exciting finale expectations. Plus, Barbara Gordon, that kind of stuff, not a fan. But, as I mentioned before, I took every episode and I gave them a rating between 1 and 10. Now, the average of this series, after I averaged it out, is a 5.85 out of 10. I'm going to round up. I'm going to be a little generous, right up to a 6 out of 10. So, is it terrible? No. Is it great? No. So to answer the questions that we asked in the intro, did the hype pay off? If you ask me, I'm probably going to say no. I was a little hyped for it when they announced it, and then it took a while to come out, and then I just kind of lost my momentum and excitement for it. So for me, I wasn't super duper excited for it to begin with, and I wasn't very excited after seeing it. So, in my opinion, no, it did not build up to the hype. But, is it any good? Yes, with a caveat. Again, like I said, the show needs to find its identity. It has some really good, bright moments in it. So, is it bad? No. Is it great? No. It's kind of right there in the middle. And I think my rating really shows my opinion of that. Again, 6 out of 10. If it were a 5 or lower, yeah, I'd say it's bad. But I think it's just a little better than that. And like I said, there's some really good ideas, some good things. Enough good in this show to keep it from being bad, in my opinion. So it's just kind of middle of the road, kind of meh, kind of... It's almost there. It's got a lot of potential, as I've been saying before. And I think that with the right writing, they can make the show a standout Batman series. But that's all I have to say about Batman Caped Crusader. I want to thank all of you guys for watching me. This is actually not only the first TV season I've reviewed, but it is also the first DC project I've reviewed. As you can see by my posters back here, I'm a massive comic book fan, specifically with comic books being adapted into TV and movies. I love superheroes, essentially. Love superhero content. I plan on talking about that a lot more on this channel. So if you like this episode, let me know. Feel free to leave some comments. If you disagree with anything I said, let me know. Let me have it, and I'll gladly talk about it with you in the comments. Plus, if you liked the video, you hated the video, you can either give it a like or a dislike. Also, if you want to see more of this kind of content, please subscribe. Now, I'm sure that they're going to be making a second season of this series. So, when that comes out, if you want to see me review it, please let me know by showing this video some love. So, like I said, like, subscribe, comment, just give me some interaction, and I'll let you know. I'm going to use that to gauge what kind of content you guys want to see and what you don't want to see. So, that being said, thank you guys all for joining me. I'm K-Swope, and I'll see you in the next one.